it was abnormally warm this past year. And I almost quit. And this is in between two marathons, the New York City Marathon and the Boston Marathon. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I can't do this. I might have to just, DNF. And so I did get through it. But afterwards, I thought, I have to go back to the very basics.
We welcome you into episode 6 of Running for Coverage. So happy that you joined us. Coming up, we'll hear more from Eden Kendall. You just heard her very familiar voice. Many of you know her from her work on radio and television. Also a terrific runner and athlete who came to it later in life, as so many of us have done so. We're going to hear her talking a little bit more about how she changed her perspective, and it really helped her motivation as she has gotten into her mid to late 50s. That's coming up here in just a bit. We'll also have a gear review from David Farraday, who we had on the program last week, and get a training tip. This time we'll focus on nutrition, and Kelsey Pontius is going to give us a thought on when you ramp up your training for a longer run, or if you're going to go from, say, 5K to 10K or 10K to half marathon, how should your nutrition be adjusted for that? Very good information from Kelsey coming up in just a bit. But first, let's look back on the week that was, because of our posting of our posting schedule this week that was interrupted by some travel. We have some, don't have any new races to tell you about, but we did want to review what happened in terms of the overall Jacksonville Grand Prix in the spring season. Dean Kruger came out as the top finisher overall, so congratulations to Dean. David Farraday, who we mentioned, we'll hear from in just a bit, was second overall. Top women's finisher, Michelle Kruger. So Kruger's doing well in the Jacksonville Grand Prix. Things will take a break now in terms of Grand Prix races until closer to the fall, and they'll ramp things up there again. We'll talk more about the Jacksonville Grand Prix in the fall season as that gets a little bit closer here on the podcast. Coming up this week, there are a few events around town. On Saturday, the Chemo Noir 1 mile and wine tasting event at Casa Marina in Jacks Beach. And then a week from Friday, it's the SUP Bridge the Gap 5K and 1 mile over the new pedestrian and running path that goes across near the Fuller Warren Bridge. So that'll be fun to see how that all plays out on Friday night. All right, let's take time out here. When we come back, we'll hear from Eden Kendall. And I would certainly say that there's some things that if you are a runner in your, let's say, from 45 on in age, I think you're going to find some things that are very interesting. If you're a runner under 45, there may be some things in here that will help you as you start thinking about what's going to happen moving forward in your running career. I thought they're very valuable things. There's some great thoughts from Eden coming up as well. That's straight ahead as we continue on. Reminder to subscribe to the newsletter. You can do that via the link. It's tagged at the top of my social media at my Twitter account at Cole Pepper. You can also email us if you want a link delivered directly to you at runningforcoverage@gmail.com. And each and every week, each and every month, we give away a prize back from a sponsor. So great way for you to keep in touch with what's happening in the neighborhood, in the running community, as well as a chance to win some cool stuff, including this month from Tucker Cycles in Avondale. And it's going to be a great opportunity moving forward to get some more great free stuff. So make sure to subscribe. When we come back, Eden Kendall joins us right here on Running for Coverage. My guest today on Running for Coverage, I will admit this has been a bit of a vanity experiment so far. Just about everybody I've talked to so far on the podcast has been a friend of mine from some level of something, whether it's been in running or something else. But I don't know the exact year that I first met Eden Kendall, but I think I know where it was, which was somewhere in the hallway of a radio station where she was working on probably the Big Ape at the time, and I was working on WOKV or something. And I immediately thought, well, geez, this young woman is going places. And I still say that because she is and continues to. So please welcome Eden Kendall. Eden, there are a lot of things we can get into here, but I want to start with your running journey and what because when we met, neither one of us were runners.
Right. That is absolutely true. But I also like that you thought this young woman is going
I still
places.
think that.
Well, because normally people, when they meet me these days, they don't think young woman, they just think woman, but that's okay. That's just part of life. Yeah, I didn't start running until my early 40s. So I think we have that in common, don't we?
Yeah, I started probably late, like 38, 39 probably,
Mhm.
and didn't get serious about it until 3 or 4 years later. And by the way, on the young woman thing, I didn't know how old you were until I saw your age group in a race, and I was like, no, that can't be right. And I
That's
still
the
think that.
only upside to whenever you have a birthday and you can go into the next age group. It's the only time you really say, wow, I'm really looking forward to this birthday. And then another 4.5 years go by before you feel that way again.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so what got you started in running? Why did you decide at a later date in life that you decided you're going to be a runner?
So it was really part of just this entire cumulative fitness thing I'd gotten myself into. I was actually hosting a TV show, a Biggest Loser kind of themed show on First Coast News here in town. And so we were working with trainers, and people were getting out and getting off the couch and going and doing things, getting out of their comfort zone. So it was kind of along those lines where I started to do it, that in conjunction with a passion project I had going on for kids fitness, where we were putting on this big race called the Kids Fitness Zombie Chase. And parents were dressing like zombies and just literally chasing their kids around in the streets at the St. John's Town Center. And it was always for a charitable cause. And it was, the whole idea was to get kids moving. So it kind of all flowed together. I thought, well, I can't ask everybody else to go out and run, and then I'm not running at all. And then I did my first 5K. And I think a lot of people will realize that the first time you run a 5K and you're around all these other people, you realize this is very different than when I just throw on some headphones and I hit the sidewalk outside of my house. This is like a sport. This is fun.
Yeah, the energy is something that
Yeah,
if somebody, I don't suspect there are a lot of people who have never run a 5K listening to this podcast, but
probably not.
if there are, and you've never done it, like you have to experience that because the energy is remarkable, even for a race with say 150 or 200 people, much less if you're talking about a Grand Prix race or the Donna or the Gay River Run. It's the energy is remarkable, and it is a little bit addicting in a way. Even if you're dragging your carcass across the finish line half an hour later or something, it's there's something about that. You're like, well, as soon as you get done with it, you think, yeah, I can do it again. It almost demystifies what a 5K is all about.
And a 5K, a lot of people will tell you, oh, a 5K, that's a beginner's race. Eventually, you will get to a point, if you are serious about trying to place in your age group or anything, where a 5K will kill you. It can kill a guy. I mean, it is really hard to run a 5K fast. You can't really wait and, catch up later. You have to go out fast. So the thing about a 5K is there are a couple of ways to enjoy it. You can be like a tutu person and dress up in a costume, which is just as enjoyable, I have found, or you can race it. And so somewhere between doing it just for fun and racing it, there was that switch that went off in me. And I thought, you know what, I can actually win in my age group because I'm already in my 40s. If I'd started in my 20s, maybe not, but I was already in my 40s. My equipment was fairly new because I hadn't used my knees or my joints for much else. I was not an athlete growing up. So it soon became apparent that if I really trained and really tried, I might actually get a prize. And I didn't have any of those kind of trophies or ribbons from when I was a kid. So I got really into that.
It's interesting because there are some age groups for men and for women that you would think might be tougher or easier, that they sort of go against code. Um, if you look at the 20 to 25 age group for women, usually that's not a very competitive group because either they're running in college or they're starting families at a younger age or whatever. I actually think that the 40 to 45 women category is a tough group to get on the podium for because you've got people who have decided that they're going to run, that this is going to be a big thing for them. Um, if they're mothers, then we know they're tough and they can endure a lot. That's not an easy age group to have success in.
It's funny. You get this kind of imposter syndrome where you feel like you have to justify it. Someone will say, "Oh, hey, I saw you won your age group or came in second or third," and you feel instantly like you have to say, "Well, yeah, because I'm old." But you're right. There are definitely some fasties out there in every age group, and there is that strange phenomenon where once your kids are raised and they're grown and they're out of the house, you have a little bit more time and you can train. I think the early 40s is one of those kind of groups where you don't see it as much. I think late 30s, early 40s, that's when kids are in high school and it gets really tough to take any time for yourself. So I do think I came in at an opportune age group to show up. But it is very easy to try to dismiss it too by saying, well, so and so didn't show up today and that's the only reason I got on the podium. And I think that's pretty prevalent, especially if you start at an older age.
Eden, all three times I've been on the podium in the mile championship, somebody hadn't shown up. So I'm willing to take that as a
But
as an asterisk, but I'll wear that asterisk proudly.
But isn't it amazing that's the first thing we think? We don't think
Yeah,
like, hey, I showed up. We
yeah.
think, well, so and so didn't show up.
Well, it's a great thing you talk about the motivation and sort of the mindset. When somebody says, "Well, I didn't run very well today," I tend to tell them, "Well, you ran better than a million people in Jacksonville who didn't get off the couch." And that's it's if you're competitive and you're measuring yourself against yourself and your past performances, that can be tough. I mean, that's you I think runners' mentality and athletes' mentalities in general are that you want to get better. You think every time you do it, you should be a little bit better than you were before if you know you've put the work in. And some days you just don't have it for whatever reason. And you can make excuses about it or whatnot. But I wonder how you have thought about whether it's in running or some of the Spartan events you've done or any other sort of athletic endeavors, how you think about one date to the next versus over a longer kind of 30,000 foot view of the progress you're making.
Interesting. I think what I tend to do is like everybody else. I do compare one performance to another one. And a lot of times, especially when you're in a running community like Jacksonville, where there are so many events that you do annually, so you really can look back and say, okay, I ran this exact event, same exact course, and I ran it on a similarly weather kind of day because it's always in June or it's always in September. And so it is really easy to get hard on yourself because you are comparing kind of apples to apples. But, there is, like you said, Cole, there's so much that goes into it. It's, how are you feeling? With women, there could be hormonal things that might be affecting the way you're running.
Men too, sometimes
And
too.
men too, but I can't speak for them. And I think it can really create some beating up on yourself for that. And so you're right about, and I kind of lost track of what the original question was, but I do think you're right. I think when we compare ourselves to ourselves, even though you kind of think like, hey, that's the healthiest thing to do. We shouldn't be in competition with each other. We're all runners, and I'm only racing against myself. And I've said that a million times, but racing against yourself isn't as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, and there is a point, and it's something you've been very open and certainly willing to talk about, is there's a point as you age that it's hard to compete with your younger self, even if your younger self is only 2 or 3 or 4 years before.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, I know you went through some battles to try to keep your motivation going and continue to do what you love to do because you weren't maybe getting that same kind of payback at one point.
It was tough. And I reset all of my PRs. That was the first thing I did. I decided when I turned 55, I'm 56 now, I'll be 57 in July. And I said, you know what? I'm going to reset all my PRs. It is ridiculous for me to be chasing a PR that I got in my early 40s when I was just starting to run. A few things have happened since then. One, there's more wear and tear on my body. Two, I'm older. There are some things you just can't argue. Now, this doesn't speak for everybody because there are some runners in our community that are getting faster every single day. One that comes to mind is Shelley Allen. I mean, she recommended, as a matter of fact, a really great book. And since I'm no expert, all I can do is tell you that I read a great book called Next Level, and Dr. Stacy Sims is the author of that one. And she did a lot of studying of women's hormones from teens all the way on up. And then this book specifically focuses on menopause, which I know isn't probably, you talk a lot about on your podcast, Cole, but
Not a lot, no.
women of a certain age should be thinking about these things. It doesn't mean you throw your hands up and you give up and you say, "Oh, I'll never have another PR," or "I can't take on a different distance that I've never done." It just means you have to be realistic with yourself and recognize that you might need longer to recover. You might need different nutrition. You might need to go see someone about your hormones. There's just a lot to take into consideration. And I think you do yourself a real disservice when you do what I did, which is start beating yourself up for not being able to hang in the heat like you used to be able to.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about as we talked a little bit about it, but also seeing what you were putting on social media, um, was knowing how determined of an athlete you are. That must have been so difficult because you don't want to give in to something, right? And age or a medical situation or hormones or whatever, these are things that are beyond our control largely. Um, it, what was the tipping point for you to say, okay, it's not giving in, it's just recognizing something that was, naturally happening that you had to deal with?
I can tell you the exact moment because I know that since we celebrate all the races in Jacksonville, you'll be very familiar with the Evergreen Pumpkin Run 10 miler. And it was abnormally warm this past year. And I almost quit. And this is in between two marathons, the New York City Marathon and the Boston Marathon. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I I can't do this. I might have to just, DNF. And so I did get through it. But afterwards, I thought, I have to go back to the very basics. I have to figure out what was I doing before that I'm not doing now? Why can't I get through a race in the heat? And yes, I recognize it's humid, but there's something going on with me. So I did go back to the drawing board and I started to think about things like sleep and stretching and foam rolling and all of the things that you kind of forget that you used to do when you were newer to running, but then you started getting like, man, I'm lazy. So I started doing that. I started doing more strength training because I'd gotten away from that a little bit. And then the most important thing was starting to just recognize that I didn't have to go out as though I was trying to set a new PR because I want to reset my PRs. And so once that happened, I was able to really, I guess, give myself grace to it. That's kind of a overused term, but it's something you kind of have to forgive yourself and also allow yourself. Now, that doesn't mean giving up because there are some people out there that would say, like, well, don't go around telling everybody when they get to a certain age that they can't run faster than they're running now, or they can't stay as fast as they're currently running, because that's definitely not the case for everybody. But for me, I was struggling and beating myself up for it.
How much did it impact you? I know you have a pretty tight community of runners around you. How much of a difference did that make?
Um, you know, I think how much did having those women around me make? All the difference in the world. In fact, I've had a few long runs with some of my girlfriends where we listened to the audiobook I was just telling you about. Like, we ran and just listened to this woman talking about menopause and getting older and adaptogens and things we'd never heard of. And I just, it blew my mind how hungry for knowledge other women were on that subject because people weren't talking about it. And I don't want to spend any time like reflecting on parts of that book because I don't fully understand it. It's very sciencey, and I hope that people who are interested will go and read it. But what I will say is that I'm constantly telling other women about that book because it made me forgive myself more.
Yeah, that's enormous. So I'm kind of I was just looking back at some old Garmin data
Mhm.
from my heaviest running days. Recently had a
Which
friend
was
challenge.
when was that?
Oh, probably 2017, 2018.
Mhm.
Before my daughter was born, before the pandemic, before my schedule got too crazy to manage. And I was looking back at it and I was thinking, my goodness, I did some great stuff. Those watching on YouTube just saw the dog pop up there behind Eden. So the ratings will be up on this one because we have a dog appearance.
You can never go wrong with a dog appearance.
Exactly.
She's getting ready to start her running career. But anyway, 2017 was when
Yeah,
you
and
were.
so I'm running, 4 or 5 times a week. Sometimes a couple of months I ran every day. plus doing some strength training and, popping into a CrossFit class with friends and biking and doing all these things. And I was saying, man, I was the two things I realized. I wasn't quite as fast as I was remembering that I was, but I was putting in work way more often than I have since then. And so now I've got to figure out, and this is great things you're telling me here to think about as I'm getting back to it, and I'm going to point toward running the Thanksgiving half this year. Um, that's going to kind of be my goal race for 2023. Um, is to balance that with where I am now in my life and fitness and age and everything else. Um, I'm the young guy in the age group now at the age of 50, so I feel like maybe I could do something.
Yeah,
Um,
dig in. Although,
but
yeah.
the point is just about comparing. We all have different. There are 100 versions of ourselves as a runner, depending on the day, time, the work you put in, and everything else. So I think that's a great point. You also have a podcast, Uncluttered and Unfiltered, is the headline title.
Hmm.
What does that cover?
So it's so funny because you and I have a similar experience in which we had really crazy schedules. And then we found ourselves with maybe not all the time in the world, but some more time than we had. So what are we going to do? Fill it, right?
Mhm.
So my friend Christine Stone, who is a professional organizer, and I went to lunch and she suggested we do a podcast, not about organizing. I'm, by the way, a very disorganized person, extreme, like I'll lose things. I can't ever find my phone. Everything's a mess. However, one thing we did have in common was that we were both over 50, and she said, let's do a podcast and let's just talk about all the things that women over 50 either don't talk about or do talk about with each other but don't realize that there are a lot of others out there doing the same. And so we have been doing this since August, having a blast. The full name is Uncluttered and Unfiltered because she's very uncluttered and I'm very unfiltered, and it's the podcast for women over 50. And we've had a blast today. We just recorded an episode about sex with a sex educator because women over 50 have different things we talk about than women who are in their 20s and going to the bars. So it's just been a really great experience.
We will link to that in our
Thank
newsletter. So if
you.
anybody wants to subscribe and catch on there, um, I'm thinking about listening just to see if I can figure out things that, the secrets that I don't know about, which are many for women of any age, much less over 50.
I'll tell
Um,
you, yeah, everybody is invited to listen more. The thing we hear the most, though, because she is an organizer and we do somehow stumble upon a lot of organizational tips throughout the course, I can't tell you how many women have been coming up to me saying, I've cleaned out my closet. So it's not just sex and it's not just menopause and whining. It's a lot of helpful tips as well, but it's been really fun. Podcasting is just great. It's especially for people like you and I, Cole, who have had specific limits put on how long we can talk and to whom we can speak. And when all of a sudden the power is just in your own hands and you can just have chit chats just for the sake of it, it's really eye opening how many people are very, very interesting.
yeah, and I would give you 100 amens to that. No doubt about that. I do want to ask you some questions, but I mentioned before, I think of you as a very determined athlete.
Thank you.
Do you think of yourself that way, number one? And number two, when you're in a run, let's say, whatever the distance is, and your body starts saying, let's back off, what do you do to tell your body to cram and so you can continue to try to accomplish what you want to accomplish?
Okay, disclaimer, this probably isn't the healthiest mindset, but I typically say to myself things like, who did you tell what you think your time is going to be? Usually it's my husband or one of my best running friends. And what are you going to do? Say you didn't feel like it? What are you going to tell them now? And it shouldn't be about what I'm telling someone else or the accountability factor or how am I going to feel if I get to stand on that podium, or how am I going to feel if I get to set a new PR for myself? But those are kind of some of the things that go through my mind. And I know that in the past, my husband, Steve, has said things jokingly, but not jokingly, like, if you're going to walk, just don't even come home. And so like I'll say that to myself. I'll just be like, what are you going to say to Steve after this race? Oh, I gave up and so I walked. And again, that's not against anything. Like I'm all about people who do Galloway too. I just did it in a marathon. It was a lifesaver for me because I wasn't where I wanted to be at that point. And it's a wonderful way to run and run fast and run long. But in a 5K, he told me, he said, you have no business walking in that 5K. And so now, even though it's been years since he said that to me, I always think, okay, if you're not gonna run this race, just don't even bother. But that's not always the case because, as I mentioned, there was that one race where I decided to just slow down and walk, and it was great.
It reminds me of the old line attributed to a mother of a Spartan soldier who said, "Either come back with your shield or on it."
Yes, yes.
That's sort of the same thing.
And it's not the healthiest mindset.
No,
It's
well,
just
listen,
what works for me.
I will say too. I mean, mental health professionals probably should not dig in too deeply to the secret conversations that runners have with themselves when things are going on, because most of us don't care how terrible the thoughts are that we're having as long as it keeps us going, right?
What is going through your mind? What do you say to yourself?
I'm not very good at this. I'm asking this question to a lot of really good runners who I'm having on the podcast, and I had a stretch where I saw my performance going down, and um, this was before I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I didn't know why I wasn't being able to perform the way I was, and I kept having this battle in my head about the monster telling me to stop, and I literally started visualizing. I remember I was running it was the 5K during the Jacksonville um, Maris that year, whatever it was that year, at the end of the year, and I was just dying. I could not get my legs to go or anything else. And I started thinking, am I listening to the monster too much? Am I listening to the lazy monster sitting in the corner with, bonbons and popcorn and saying, just hang out, just walk and we'll be fine. And I couldn't push through that. Well, I later found out it was a medical situation that was sort of limiting me on that. But I also knew that at that point, I had not put in the work. So that you talk about the imposter syndrome. Well, that nobody knows sooner than the athlete themselves when he doesn't have it, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're running against somebody, they don't know you don't have it sometime after you realize you don't, or
Mm-hmm.
admit to yourself that you don't. And that's all. And again, because I'm a bigger guy, and because I came to running later, there are a lot of these things that I haven't developed as well. You talk about not having all the wear and tear on the legs, but the
Mm-hmm.
mental side of it too, to me, is a huge part of this, and that's so I'm still learning.
Yeah, I think the mental part is something that everybody kind of has to realize is huge. You know what it reminded me of when you were talking about the monster, that t-shirt that says "Shut up, legs, you're drunk." It's like, what are you going to listen to? Your lungs or your legs?
Yeah,
But you bring up a good point though, because you at that time did have a medical situation that needed to be addressed. So where's that line? Where's that blurry line where you're like, okay, I really do have something going on, or I'm just trying to find a good excuse to
yeah.
stop right
And I will
now.
also say that there were some 5Ks back in that 17-18 stretch where I was running, two or three races a month,
Mm,
where I might have gone out the night before and or
mm,
not necessarily prepped well for the race. And I know there's some people who can do this. I can't. So I knew what it felt like to not have it,
mm,
and to be out there. That was a different thing. And I was like, what in the world's going on? And in fact, it wasn't until after the Wolfson 55K, about 2 months later, that I finally got diagnosed, and I realized, okay, well, there was something really going on there, because my legs, nothing was working. So
mm.
anyhow, I don't want to make this all about my own challenges.
Still,
People can
though, it's interesting because
challenge out
someone
on the
listening,
road.
it's still interesting though, because someone listening might be saying, like, I'm having these symptoms and I'm wondering if maybe I should be concerned about them. And so that it's just a runner's question.
Yeah,
When are you being smart and when are you being tough? And when
yeah,
are you
and
just being
it's
dumb?
well, and how you talk about t-shirts and memes, and how many memes are there about the way that a runner talks to the doctor? Oh, it's not bad. I know I broke the leg. It was about 6 months ago, and I've run 7 races since then. But I wanted
Yeah.
it to be fixed, but I don't want to slow down in my training. Right? That's just that's sort of the runner's mentality. a couple other things I wanted to cover with you. One is you mentioned the Boston Marathon. Obviously, that is a bucket list race for almost any runner. What now? What are you pointing to next? What kind of event or race or uh, goal? What do you have put out there on the horizon for you to point to?
Chicago Marathon in October. And I had all but said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I was really not in the shape I should have been to run Boston at all. I had some injuries, so many different injuries going on. And I was seeing medical professionals who were telling me, like, you can do this. But I think what we landed on was that I was going to maybe just do my long run every week. And that's it leading up to Boston. And then just try to get through it. I think I did 2 minute or 3 minute run walks and just to get through it, knowing I would barely be able to walk for weeks after. It was not a good commercial for non-runners to get a glimpse of what it would be like to run a marathon because I was broken. And I promised that I would think really hard about deciding whether or not I wanted to start training for Chicago. But this is actually the week, and today's actually the first day of the marathon plan that I had downloaded, like this day upon the day we're recording. And I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna see, but I'm gonna be smart, and I'm not gonna push through like I did for Boston. I'm just gonna do it. And if my body says no, we're not gonna do this, then I won't. But that's my next goal race.
Final question for you.
Okay.
As you have, you mentioned, getting kids out of the house and everything else. Do you think that you have spent as much time on running and fitness as you thought you would before, when the kids were all at home?
Ooh, I think part of it for me, I didn't really put in that much time. It's not, let me rephrase that. I don't think it's that different for me now because I was always in a job that was over at noon doing morning radio. So the kids would be in school. So I was able to kind of knock things out during that time. That was always my midday, has always been my time to do things. And then once they were out of the house, I took on this other opportunity on TV. So that took the place of that. So it's only been in the last few months that I've had all kinds of time. And so now I think I'm really ready to pour some more time in it. But no, I did, to answer your question, boy, did I screw that one up. But to answer your question, no, I could not have, before I started running, I wouldn't have even believed it myself.
Yeah, it's
I would never have been thought I would call myself an athlete. An athlete?
there's no doubt you are, though. I mean, again, I've seen you at work, and I've seen you in competition. You are an athlete and a great
Hard
one
to
to
believe.
follow as well. Eden,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much for jumping on with us, and best of luck, and we'll be following your progress as you get ready for Chicago.
And I'll be listening to all your episodes. I'm going to get completely caught up. So the next time I see you, we can start to talk about those because it's a great idea for a podcast. This community needed it.
Every week here on the podcast, we bring you a gear review from a local runner, somebody who has something that they want to talk about that is the thing they won't run without, their favorite piece of gear or nutrition or equipment, you name it. And David Farraday has his favorite piece of gear. And not a big surprise, it starts with the feet.
Well, I'm very lucky with shoes. I've always worn Brooks. They seem to fit my tiny feet, and I feel very comfortable in them. I started wearing their carbon-plated shoe, I guess, once it came out a couple years ago, and I enjoy that feel. And in a race, it definitely makes a difference. I eat some snacks before every race, a very small peanut butter and jelly sandwich, maybe a bite of a banana, maybe something with some salt on it. Pre-race isn't as much of a deal to me as post-race is. I want to try and, because again, I'm a very lean person and runner, and I like to get things back in my stomach after a race.
So one of the things that I am doing is I am trying to get back and try to put some more miles on my training. Is I'm looking toward a race in probably the Thanksgiving half marathon is what I'm looking at to run what will be my longest race. And part of that is the training and making sure you're focused and have a good plan and get a good coach to help you if you need to. Part of that too is about nutrition and how do you fuel your body as you're starting to put in more and more miles in training, and then certainly as far as race day, which is a long way off for me. But Kelsey Pontius, who, as you know, if you've listened to the podcast, has qualified for the U.S. Olympic Marathon trials for a second time, is also a registered dietitian. She has her own nutrition company, Meteor Nutrition, and she has some tips for what you need to do in terms of your nutrition when you're ramping up the mileage.
Halves and marathons, you're just putting in more miles for the most part. And so just overall more calories, I would say. Also for halves and fulls, you're having to consider how you're fueling during that activity. I always suggest anything over 75 minutes, you're getting fuel in every 30 to 45 minutes. Whereas with 5K and 10K running, you're not really having to think about that too much. Maybe 10K, if you're, running 10, 11 plus minute miles, you might consider it because you're going to be out there. But other than that, you're not thinking it as much as half marathoners and marathoners. With 5K and 10K, what becomes important is that, again, your heart rate's higher. And so you're burning a large percentage of those carbohydrates. And so while you might not be eating as many calories as, say, relative to your self-training for a marathon and a half marathon, you still have a high heart rate. So you're burning a lot of calories. And then for the calories that you are eating with 5K, 10K, a large percentage of those should be coming from carbohydrates because with marathon and half marathon, you're doing a lot of like aerobic training. Whereas with 5K, 10K faster stuff, you're kind of using different systems. Basically systems over like lactate threshold, where you're really relying on like non-aerobic systems that just blast through calories and carbohydrates.
Our thanks as always to Kelsey for the nutrition tips. We'll have more on injury prevention, injury recovery, and overall training coming up as each week progresses here on Running for Coverage. Thanks as well to Darren Ronan of the Ronan School of Music, who composed and performs our original music here on the podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on Amazon. Be sure to let your friends know too that we're out there. Love to grow the running community here in Jacksonville. Thanks so much for watching or listening, wherever you're doing it, for Running for Coverage. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.